First of all, thank you for, where are you, Shelley? There we go. Thank you for that amazing introduction. It is true, I am an absolute fan, Marco, KnowledgeWorks, and the whole KnowledgeWorks family. But I'm not just a fan because they're amazing people. I'm a fan because their work is that important. I am, where am I? Oh, there we go. Oh gosh, I've got to do 3 things. So my name is Linda Berlot, and those of you who know I am Italian, but I know that you must be asking yourselves, what kind of an Italian has that accent, right? Linda, Bruna, and Laura Berlot, just putting that out there for my credentials. I was born in Zambia, lived in Italy until I was 16. I was born to Italian parents. And then at the age of 16, my parents divorced, and I went with my mum down to Zimbabwe, where I finished my schooling. South Africa, did all my, that other education, and then have lived in several countries, worked in several countries, and across different continents. I can so relate to so much of what was said earlier this morning. And the reason why I say this work is so important is because I have experienced it firsthand. I've experienced what you were just talking about, Matt, being excluded and marginalized as a continental going to a British colony, an ex-British colonial country in a boarding school, so felt that, and so on, right? So it's, I guess it's been my life's work, consciously or unconsciously. For me, intercultural issues light up like string. Somebody said it's an invisible force behind a lot of what we see, but for me, it's visible. And the way that I see it, or even better, feel it, is when something starts to go wrong and I can't quantify what it is, right? So when there is something in the dynamic between me and somebody else, or between the teams that I coach, and we can't put our finger on it. Very often, if it's not relationship, it's culture, right? And so that is why I do the work that I do. I lead Berlot Group. We are a team coaching organization. We coach C-suite leadership teams across the globe, really. We also run a school where we teach people to be team coaches. And what we are really focusing on is for teams and team members, or systems, because we've got colleagues that focus on families and partnerships and couples. But what we're focusing on is for people to be in better relationship with each other. And for us, if we can teach team members or systems to be in better relationship and to fight right, we believe that we will create peace in the world. When I'm coaching leadership teams, which here in Dubai, generally, I'm the oldest person in the room. They are young, they are vibrant, and it's so exciting for me, because when we are coaching them and we put this work in their hand and we're teaching them how to be together in an intercultural or multicultural context, how to communicate more respectfully, how to be conscious and intentional about the relationships that they have, I know that we are equipping them with life skills, right? And that if they, and I often ask the question, how many of you have got kids at home? Most of them do. I know that we are changing the world, one system at a time, because we put this work in their hands. They teach that to their children, and those children will be different out in the world. You've heard me say this now a couple of times, I am Italian. I was 40 when I learned that you can be in conflict with somebody and actually be respectful. That is quite embarrassing to say, but in my family of origin, conflict was all-out war, and you are in it to win it. That, and the whole drama that came with that. You know, the loud voices, the expressive hand gestures, the slamming of the doors, the sulking for 3 weeks, the whole dramatic piece. I couldn't believe when I started to go through, and it was the OSC model, but actually many of the other coaching models too, where I learned, hold on a moment, I can actually be in conflict with you, and we can be hating each other a little bit because we're standing on different sides of the fence, but we can still be respectful. We can still keep it above board, and we don't need to annihilate each other. And actually, what we can do is be in discourse. I can actually champion your voice and you mine. even though I'm still holding on to my own perspectives. And if we do that, at the end, we would have learned something about each other. And that, for me, is the crux of intercultural intelligence. Like, how do we be with that which is different and be curious? The ability that we have or don't to stay in the conversation, no matter how hard, no matter how challenged I am, because your point of view is so different. So why do we do what we do? Well, it's very simple. And where's Bart? I will fight you to the death. We coined this first. Relationships matter from the boardroom to the bedroom. But it's great to see that great minds think alike. And it's true. You know, if we're not able to build strong relationships with each other, then no matter what great initiatives we do at work, no matter how high our targets, how impressive the technology that we have, we will never succeed. It's all about relationship. And Marco, you spoke earlier that the need in the world as AI starts to take over is for us to be more human. Well, this is it. It doesn't get more human than being in relationship. But not just being in relationship. It's about being conscious and intentional about the type of relationships that we build, particularly in an intercultural context. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I'm here to talk to you about a topic that I'm so passionate about. But the model that we use of coaching is ORSC, and it really, and you can Google it and learn more about it, but what is different about that model is that we coach the system as a whole, one united system, and we don't coach the individuals in the system. And the reason why we do that is because we believe that together we're stronger. Right? It's hard for me to change my behavior and then come into a system and expect myself to stay changed in a system that may be toxic, for example. It's easier if we're doing it together and we're helping each other grow in a particular direction. So that's why we prefer to work with the system as a whole. These are some of the clients that we are working with currently or in the past. And you can see they're both national, international, big, small. Oh, that's because of the multitasking. I lied. I can't multitask. These are some of the clients. And I can tell you that most of the time they come to us for some of these reasons. There are an unending amount of incomprehensions because all of the teams we coach are multicultural. And so we misunderstand each other. Or I look at you and I have a perspective of what I am seeing, but I don't bother to check it out. So a great example of that, when I first came to this country, is in my culture, this gesture, depending on where you put it, and here can mean three different things. Imagine my dismay and frustration when I got into the taxi and he, you know, he's giving me this gesture. Or even at work where people do this, it means something totally different. So it's important. This is just a small example of if I'd projected my context onto every person that did this to me, I would have been in constant conflict, right? So it's important to keep checking the context. So resistance to change, miscommunication and conflict, lack of alignment, silos, and many, many other reasons. But at the crux of it, it's all about relationship. Can we create alignment between us, which is not about my way or your way? I can't remember who this morning said that seesaw, where I am above you and you're above me. Chris said that, right? So it's less that, it's can we align around a position? Can we create an environment where we can all feel a sense of belonging that is inclusive of my way or your way, right? And not one above the other. Matt, you beat me to it. I would love for you all, coaches will be coaches. I would love you all to have a conversation between you. No, take a moment though and reflect for yourself. What does belonging mean to you? What does belonging mean to you? And then let's hear what it does mean.
First, it means I'm welcome.
Yes. Yeah. I feel welcomed. All of me feels welcomed. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean?
Being authentic means that I don't have to think up front what a certain situation would require from me, but I just naturally and immediately react, and I don't have to be afraid that that meets any judgment.
Yeah, yeah. So I can be unapologetically myself. Mm-hmm. Home. There's a feeling of home. Mm-hmm. Brings the best out of you, yes.
Feel understood. I don't need to explain myself every time I come into the context.
Exactly. All of these reasons are true. Now, how do we create belonging in a multicultural setting when there are no commonly understood norms? Right? In Italy, in my town, everybody knows that a loud voice does not indicate anger. Anger is accompanied by a bunch of other things, then we know. But in other, I was married to a South African. In South Africa, any South Africans in the room? In South Africa, a loud voice equals anger very often, right? And so for the first year of our marriage, we were in constant conflict. And I was constantly confused, right? We didn't realize we were in an intercultural marriage. Yeah? So I'm here to talk to you about, thank you, how do we implement successful DEIB initiatives in a global context so that we can create equity, inclusion, and belonging? Because these are all important. There's so much evidence to substantiate that positive teams are more productive. So positive, we don't mean ha ha ha, rah rah rah, cracking jokes. Positive means I feel comfortable, we like working together, there's trust, there's safety, we have a sense of belonging. And positivity equals productivity. That's kind of obvious, right? So implementing initiatives that are successful, because these are important initiatives, is important, right? But very often, even though they are well-intentioned, they fall flat in a cultural context, other cultural contexts. So I want to preface what I'm about to say with all these good things. DEIB initiatives are important. What they want to address is valid and is important. I'm not suggesting we don't implement these initiatives. People thrive when they feel seen, heard, and understood. And I truly believe, and Marco, I know you and I have had lots of conversations around that very often these DEIB initiatives, there's really good intent behind them, right? So in an environment where there is belonging, everyone has a right to have their own come-from place and for this to be acknowledged. Or everybody has the right to have your own voice, opinion, and for this to be heard and acknowledged. Teams which are inclusive, and where people feel a sense of belonging, are high-performing. Any questions around that? Anybody disagree with this? Somebody disagrees? Sorry? Yeah, now comes the but. The problem, and some of these things might be a little bit, well, I didn't want to shy away from saying what needs to be said sometimes, right? So very often, so here are some of the challenges. Very often, initiatives created in one cultural context are expected to be rolled out and to be successful in other cultural contexts. but they don't take into consideration what may be going on in those lands. There may be a war, there may be time spirits, there may be, you know, a bunch of things. There might be a drought or famine, or, you know, there could be a bunch of things. So, for example, an initiative on gender equality or racism in one culture, let's say in America, for example, being rolled out here or anywhere in the Middle East while we have the whole Gaza strife and conflict, is not going to resonate as much as it would in other countries. Why? Why do you think that is? Because we've got other stuff that's more important to us in this moment. Does it mean that initiatives around racism are not important? No, absolutely not. They are. But in this moment, in this place in the world, there are other things that are more important to us, right? And we need to be aware of that. So there are some of these initiatives that come from a particular worldview. Let's say, for example, a guilt, innocence worldview, and they get rolled out into other countries where perhaps power, fear, or honor, shame are more important. So a good example of this is when some assessments are asking leaders or our teammates to be transparent. Transparency is valued in the West. Being honorable and life-affirming or empowering is more important in these parts of the world, in 2/3 of the rest of the world, for example. So asking me as a leader to be transparent may not exactly resonate, right? How's this landing?
With you.
Anybody feeling uncomfortable? No. There are some initiatives that are so important that belong to, that are created by a particular person and rolled out with the assumption that that is important for everybody, right? And that may not be the case. Maybe I feel more of an affinity towards racism, for example. Maybe I'm eager more to work with that rather than some of the other initiatives that appear on the world at the moment. Initiatives created, so what we don't take into account sometimes is that different cultures have different contexts. So, for example, individual accountability versus system accountability, right? So I hold myself accountable in certain world contexts versus I am not accountable to myself. I am accountable to my clan, my family, the team or the business I work for. Therefore, asking me to hold myself accountable may not be relevant in certain contexts. Sorry?
I'm too much.
Yeah.
And I got the warning.
He's
over here.
agreeing with you non-stop, and he hasn't done that in any other presentation, so I just looked at him and he's saying, am I too much? Yes, you are.
Is this resonating?
Direct communication.
Yeah, sorry, I'm very
There we go. Yes, exactly. So direct versus indirect communication very often causes a problem when we're rolling these kind of initiatives out, right? This is my favorite. Relationship-centric versus problem-centric. So the assumption that, guilt, innocence, sometimes, when there is an issue, it's very important for us to name the issue, correctly name the issue, correctly use the right words. The person who has the best mastery of language is the person who is seen as the expert around that topic. And we need to clearly define what the topic is and dissect it before we can actually talk about and discuss the topic, right? Relationship-centric, on the other hand, is where we place relationship at the center. So if there is a disagreement, we would rather focus first on the relationship, first on building trust, and then maybe working on the issue. Or maybe further down the line, the issue isn't relevant anymore because we've built our relationship back into where it's meant to be. Yep. Any thoughts around that?
I'd like to say but I don't want to get called out.
I feel it's one of the issues why it fails is also that it's not only rolled out, but it's also rolled down from organizations. And there's quite a lot of pressure because, at least in Europe, DEI is a must-have. The auditors are auditing you on DEI results. Right. So whether you like it or not as a leader, you need to have a plan for it, you need to have reporting on it, and you need to mention it in your annual report. Yeah, and it's very clear that not every organization is ready for it or spending enough resources for it, or is forcing it by rolling it down, yeah, which apparently does not work.
Absolutely right, and it's not working. So what we are seeing is that across the globe, DEIB departments are being shut down, and the initiatives are being shut down. Budgets for these initiatives are being cut down across the globe. Big organizations like Facebook, Microsoft, all of these organizations, not because these initiatives are bad, but because they're not working, right? And they're not working because of some of those and many other reasons, right? So just
also coming to mind, there's the culture war impact on this as well. So
say more.
So I see, from what I see looking at USA, for example, is that there's now louder voices kind of saying this is an initiative from the left and they're from the right, and it's making this becoming a war, a battleground.
And do you know what the issue is with that? Is that we are marginalizing diversity, right? We're saying we want to be inclusive, but we cannot even be in discourse with that which is different. So if you, if you are right and I am left, and I want to come and have a conversation or be in discourse with you, not giving up my voice, just being in conversation, my own people start to marginalize me and see me as a traitor. I'm fascinated that we've lost the ability to stay in discourse. When did that happen? Right?
Yeah. And actually that can also lead to a wrong feeling of belonging. So I might feel that I'm belonging until, for example, a conflict happens, and then it turns out that no, I was actually not a real part of this group.
Right.
If we only keep it on a surface level.
Right, right. Yeah, right.
I also see oftentimes it seems to be dealing with the surface, not the depth. So, oh, we'll have a protest or something, rather than actually figuring out, like, dealing with the culture of working with it.
How do we fix it? Yeah. 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 It's mandated. Marco.
I'm reminded of an example with one of our clients in California. So they decided to make bringing your whole self to work became a rally point. And about 4 months into the program, they realized that bringing your whole self to work, you have individual accountability on there, much easier for individual accountability-oriented people, much easier for innocence guilt-oriented people.
Yeah.
So what happened in the company, the innocence guilt-oriented voices became louder, more present.
Yeah.
Community accountability-oriented voices, they became dimmer.
Yeah.
And they were heard of less. And it had exactly the opposite effect that they intended. And this was just in the same country, in the same state.
Yeah.
But because they didn't take culture into account, it actually backfired.
Yeah. And Marco, I love where you're pointing is that culture isn't just national or, you know, it's individual. It's at that individual level, as we've spoken about all day. So these are some of the reasons why they fail. Let's look at some of the challenges. Sometimes, very often, there are strong guilt, innocence assumptions behind the initiatives. Just take a look at some of our assessment tools, right? And there is a strong leaning towards guilt and innocence language and expecting teams or leaders to adopt that same language and those same beliefs. That doesn't always roll out across cultures.
Linda, Just a quick example, Gallup Foundation, the employee engagement survey of 2022-2023 changed the way. All of a sudden the scores in 22 were really high, in 23 they dropped. They changed the questions.
To become more?
They tried to become more culturally intelligent in the way they asked questions about employee engagement.
Yeah.
The scores were artificially high.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine in a power-fear dynamic where we feel very comfortable speaking directly down, but we don't feel comfortable speaking up. If we are doing 360s for the leader, either one or two things are going to happen, right? Either one, I'm just going to people please, because it's not appropriate for me to be direct up, or I'm going to use the tool as a way to kind of stab, right? Has anybody experienced that? I can't tell you the amount of times that here I have worked with local teams, and I've had to go in and explain the questions one by one after they had done the assessment. It had gone pear-shaped. The leader felt deeply embarrassed, and so we needed to go back in to kind of make it right and save honor and face, and read the questions and set context for the questions one by one by one by one, so that we could kind of get a better understanding and have more accurate results, right?
If I can just contribute one thing. I'm also based in Dubai, and we did a cultural renovation with a big organization here. And the first step was to send around a corporate survey to everyone.
Yeah.
And the expectations were very clear that the leadership expected a participation rate of around 90%. So what was the request to all the team leads and heads? Make sure that everybody participates. So when we then traveled to the different locations, including Egypt, for example, we did have conversations with some of the groups mixed up through all of the different hierarchy levels. And after 3 of those conversations, in different ones, team leads came up to us and they told us, well, you know what, actually, we were standing at the desk and we were filling out for our teams because we had to make sure that we are meeting the expected participation rate. So it didn't matter at all whether they filled it out or not, because in the end, the results were not useful.
And what worldview was driving that, do you think?
Power and fear.
And? Honor and shame. We can't be embarrassed, especially if those results go globally. We can't embarrass ourselves over here.
Yeah, it was a Middle Eastern
Right?
organization, so also very power and fear.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was a shock to us because, of course, they also came to us and they said, please don't tell anybody.
Honor, shame. Right? Let's do everything. Let's work internally to save our reputation, but don't share it outside. Yeah.
But don't tell anybody how we did it.
Great examples. So, lack of understanding of and respect for local context. That's what you're saying, right? So maybe there's a piece of work that needs to happen before we send out the assessment, or maybe the assessment has to be reworded, right, to suit the local context.
Then I can build on that. I had an LCP, a Leadership Circle Profile debrief recently, in which we mentioned about like empowering fear, people taking the opportunity to have a bit of a stab, and some of the people had taken a bit of a stab, particularly. And his response was, "Oh, they're just taking a stab at me, therefore these results aren't true."
Right.
Yeah. And the answer was yes and. Because actually, them taking a stab at him was part of the whole thing that's taking place, and his response to that was part of the coaching. So the way we handle the tools is...
Absolutely. In my experience, when there is this taking a stab at, there's a need for more safety in the organization. There's a need to really build that safety and trust, and for the leader to role model that you can give me feedback and I won't react. Right? Only when, and also it will take time for somebody in a power fear dynamic. Even if you flatten the equation, it doesn't mean that they will speak up. right? So it takes time.
And even if you flatten it, they might be scared of it.
Exactly. So, you know, I think every Westerner, when they first have come to this country, has gone into a meeting or taken over a team, joined a new team, multicultural team, and said, great, everybody, you're all empowered to do your own work. And then wonders why the work doesn't arrive. And then, you know, what's wrong? Why is the work not coming? Nobody speaks. Do you all know what to do? Yes, yes. Are you all comfortable knowing and doing what you need to do? Yes, yes. And it still doesn't come. Because there is an honor shame. I'm not going to tell you if I'm embarrassed or if I'm afraid or if I don't understand, because it will create embarrassment for me. Maybe also I don't think you're going about it in the right way, so I don't want to embarrass you, right? So just because somebody who has self-accountability comes on board and assumes that everybody else does too, doesn't mean that that is so. So we have to work with that before we can implement some of these initiatives. Yeah?
And I have the same as feedback in teams. It's not only that it does not work, but I also discovered that I feel the people, I ask feedback
Yeah.
to people that are not used
Yeah.
to feedback to a boss.
Yeah.
I also make feel the people very
Uncomfortable.
asking them, because they're simply not skilled and not used, and it feels so inappropriate. So pulling out the feedback has been a big challenge. How do you do that? It's simply not only not working, but it's making people really uncomfortable.
Absolutely, because they're not used to doing that, right? One of the other challenges is that some of these initiatives have got a very, and Marco, you taught me this, they are have a very activist feeling to them, right? Maybe it is because it is something that's important to me. Maybe because I've experienced being on the other end of an initiative, right? And so, or an issue. And so I want to drive it, I have passion, I am eager for it to succeed, but it's absolutely not relevant in another part of the world, right? So, there are many. Can you think of any that may not be appropriate or relevant here in this part of the world? They are relevant, they are important, but maybe not appropriate in the way that they are worded in our part of the world. Can you think of any?
Well, the way diversity is treated in the West versus here.
Yeah.
Here it's more about gender diversity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Completely different diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the issues that are happening in America, for example, so the racism and the gender diversity, but also pronouns and all of that, extremely important. And I'm not saying they are not important issues, but there's work to be done here. I can't just push them in the way that I do at home. I have to reword them and work with them very differently in this part of the world.
The other issue with activism is that inherently, if you are coming from an activist perspective, maybe on race or on gender or some form of inequality, it is discouraged in every activism group to be talking to the quote-unquote enemy. You don't. And as a result, these camps of activism, they don't dialogue very well with other camps of activism. I mean, you bring that into a company, it gets really complicated, especially if you export it to another country.
Absolutely. So inability to stay in discourse with that which is different, right? And the question that we're always holding is, can we really be inclusive if we are excluding, you know, that which is different, or the ability to even stay in conversation about that? So is that really inclusiveness? This, I think we've spoken about, disregard for cultural differences and different worldviews across countries, and then forcing programs that are not interculturally agile. For example, some of the ones that we've talked about. Sexual orientation, gender equality, issues that arise in the home base or the company, right, that are making an issue in other parts of the world, making sure that that's translated in other parts of the world. It's not to say that these are not important, it's just they are not applicable in the way that they're created, for example, in a guilt-innocence context. Yeah. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? So we've unpicked, yes.
I'm trying to point in my head. And this is unformed in my own mind, but do you think there's a connection between DEIB and innocence and guilt? Is it a bigger issue for innocence and guilt cultures than other cultures?
Yeah, for sure. Because in innocence and guilt, it's all about, I don't want to be guilty
And what about me?
of racism. And so teach me, I mean, I get this all the time. I was just at a DEI, so I'm leading a company through DEIB-J for Justice initiative right now. We're located in St. Paul. I'm working with an African American woman and me, and we are working with a very diverse team over there. And the older white man who was on the task force, the very first thing he felt compelled to say to me was, now I know I'm an older white man and I've got white privilege. And I didn't want to say to him, you don't have to say any of that. You are human.
There's a guilt. Yeah.
Right? So there is this, in order for me not to be whacked in the face when I participate, I better make sure that I've checked all the boxes before I say anything else. That is IG on the outside, but really driven by fear on the inside. I don't want to be guilty of being that white man.
Particularly in well, the world that we live in, we're constantly projecting onto each other, right? I was working with the team, and we were talking about, do we put pronouns or not on our Zoom screen? So it was a innocent conversation. And I shared my view, and I was told I am a white cisgendered leader, and that's the context from which I'm speaking, which is true, but the implication of what that meant felt deeply uncomfortable, particularly because I didn't feel that the person speaking knew anything about me or the work that we do here, right? And so it doesn't mean that it's not true, but it's important to be in conversation around that and to be aware that we're projecting on each other all of the time.
Linda, you did a great job explaining that on the podcast that we unpacked. The whole idea that there's so much language created around DEIB in English. So there's two issues. One is, how do you take that to another cultural context?
Yeah.
And most of that DEIB language, pronouns the classic example, cannot be translated to another language.
Yeah.
It just doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
gets really difficult.
Yeah.
Well, and then that's when you have things like Latinx, which is now transformed to Latine.
Oh,
It has
moved
morphed again.
Oh, yeah.
And it's you know, it's almost like answering the question, asking the question, what happens if a largely monocultural society attempts to create a multicultural solution? This is what happens.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to add that I think I agree with your question, or with your comment about the IG. It reminded me a year or two ago, I was actually translating, I wasn't working as a coach, but for a big company in Pakistan, and it was auditors I had to translate for, and their whole thing was that they had to audit the factories and whatever on the DI, all that stuff, you know, and make sure there was no human trafficking going on, there was no racism, there was diversity, especially for the women, whatever, and I had to translate everything, and it just didn't work. Like, I had all these questions I had to translate in the Pakistani context, and I had these simple workers in front of me, and I knew that they had no idea if I was going to translate a word for what they were going. So I had to, like...
There's simply no language for it.
I think because a lot of these initiatives, they do come, as we said, about context of organizations, and they have to roll them out
Yeah.
for auditing purposes,
Yeah.
whatever. And I think a lot of auditing stuff that comes much more from an IG
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the auditors were very nice, and I explained it to them that I had to interculturally translate it to them. And
Yeah.
and all my translations, I kind of explained the whole. I told them, okay, in other parts of the world, this is stuff that happens there, and this is why they're asking these questions. And then I try to relate it.
Educate.
Together
Yeah.
And tell them, okay,
Yeah.
here in Pakistan, these are the issues.
Yeah.
And so, because we did want to find out
Yeah.
were there issues happening.
Yeah.
So it was, yeah. Thankfully, the auditors worked well with me, but the translation.
It's fascinating, yeah.
It was very much also this whole thing of going from IG, from this auditor perspective to, okay, how do we work with this?
Absolutely. Another example was, again, I was working with a predominantly American, but there are different cultures on the team. And there was an issue, and we spent so much time dissecting the issue and talking about the issue. And I know that I sound like I speak English very well, but when it's 10 o'clock in the evening, I'm tired. My English words go out of the window, and I am struggling not to put in Italian words that we're talking. I was totally lost and confused. I didn't know what we were doing, and a certain frustration because we're talking about the issue, but we're not resolving it. We're not really unpicking it and diving into it. And this is what happens when certain cultures have mastery over a particular language. But for many of us, language is only a small part of the communication when we're in a different cultural context. And I'll give you a very simple example. I went to the pharmacy the other day. I asked for a product. The lady in front of me, she and I were in an intercultural, we were diverse. So we were getting on with it. And next to us was another client and the pharmacist, also culturally diverse. So we were very close to each other. We could all hear everybody's everything. She gave him the product he was asking. He looks at it. He says, "Can you give me the price?" She says, 1,750. He looks down. He goes, "Can you give me the price?" Now, all three of us, what are we doing? Looking at each other. And what's going on in our heads? Not quite, but some version of. Right? Then he says, he looks down again, he says, "Can you give me the price?" Accompanied by this hand gesture. Right? What did he ask for? Discount. How do we know that? Because we live in this multicultural context. We've learned that it's not only are the words that I'm using important, so is everything else, my body language, the gestures. So when we are communicating, we're not just relying on words, and we cannot, because there are no commonly understood norms, right? Thankfully, there are some solutions. You've come to the right place. How do we do it? So the first thing is, think global, act local. Meaning, great global initiative, spend some time understanding the local context, right? So that it can be relevant. McDonald's does a great job. I don't eat McDonald's. Sorry, McDonald's, not because I don't like you, but I just don't. McDonald's have got hamburgers which they roll out all around the world. What do they do in every country? They have a local flavor. You go to Mexico, you come here, you know, it's...
Rice ball in Thailand.
Exactly. Even in Italy, after much resistance, McDonald's is there. Exactly. Also, it's really important, and Marco, I learned this from you also, understand what's the importance behind the initiative. So, for example, racism as an issue, right? What's behind the issue? Could be a matter of dominance of one people over another. So in this part of the world, when we've got Gaza and all of that happening, racism as an initiative may not resonate as much right now. But now, if you change that to let's talk about where we feel dominated on by other people, all of a sudden we can relate to that, right? So it's easier to align on what's the issue behind the issue. Sometimes we drive initiatives because of law or policy, so they're driven out but have negative impacts. We've talked about that, right? It's important to find the balance between activism and creating multiple stories, which can all be right. So usually when I am an activist, I have my story. It's that which I believe about that issue, whatever the issue is, right? And it's difficult for me to accept that you've got a different story, right? So it's important to strike a balance. Of course, it's important for me to be passionate and driven, but can I hold that and hold your perspective and your story at the same time? And am I able to accept that my story is true for me, but your story is true for you? And that's extremely important to do, right? So we can hold multiple stories as being true at the same time and not one above the other. Marco, you call that polarity management, right?
The General Secretary of Amnesty International, she encourages all the workers in the company to have gentleness in the battle, because they're all activists.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you still have to be able to have constructive conversations with people who are different from you.
And to be able to not get inflamed and want to annihilate each other just because the conversation is different. Open to influence. Yeah. So in Orsk we have a saying where we say, be open to influence, but don't give up on yourself. So be open to hearing that which is different, but don't give up on yourself. It's also really important to use the litmus test, right? So when I have an initiative, do we put it through the litmus test? What we are rolling out, is it right? Is it empowering? Does it maintain our honor? If we keep checking everything through that, then we're taking into consideration all the different worldviews. And focus on culture creation. We've been talking about that all day, right? So I have some last suggestions on some skills that are needed for us as practitioners in this work. Don't you love that picture? Challenge your perspectives. Go out and check. If you have a perspective, even if you believe it's right, ask questions. Right? Ask yourself, am I right? Is it right? Be curious and ask questions. Accept multiple stories. Don't believe that your way is the only right way. And it's not about my way or your way. Sometimes we give up on ourselves and I come over to your side. It's neither of those things. It's how do we co-create a dance that is inclusive, right? Aligned around a particular topic.
Actually what intercultural means. It's not my culture, it's not your culture, it's something in between.
Absolutely. So there are many reasons why I love this this body of work. One of which is because in the systems coaching world, we say that there's you are an entity and I am an entity, and when we're in relationship, something is generated, and we create a third entity, right? It becomes the relationship. Couples understand that all the time. They understand that very well. In the intercultural world, so there's your culture, my culture, and a co-creator, the third cultural space, right? Exactly, Chris's hallway, exactly. And if we can consciously and intentionally design the behaviors that will bring that to life, we will have an inclusive and a diverse and inclusive environment. The ability to code switch means that if I am Italian, when I go to Japan, can I carry on being as extroverted, loud, gesticulating Italian that I am? Will that go down very well? Maybe not. They might give me some leeway, but maybe not. So I want to be more respectful of the culture that I'm in, and I learn to code switch. And we, in this part of the world, learn how to do that, and we do it unconsciously. You know, third cultural kids that we were talking about, they are doing that all the time. They're switching between those doors constantly. We can remember that we can be in relationship and have different perspectives. We can even be married and have very different worldviews. Develop the ability to stay in discourse, even when it's different. So of course it's easier to be with like-minded individuals. Why? Because we don't have to explain everything. In a in a relationship where we are different, we have to spend a lot more time explaining what this means. Explain what this means, what this means, what this means. Right? Many people don't talk about diversity. They shy away from it because it's uncomfortable. Right? In the teams that I work with, and indeed even in my own team, we talk about diversity. We talk about what's important for you and what's important for me and how are you feeling, you know. We check in with each other on how we're feeling. This was the biggie for me. Respectful communication and what that means across cultures. Learn how to be in conversation with somebody that in a respectful way, right? And understand also that respect, trust, safety means different things in different cultures, right? In some cultures, we can be angry and swear at each other, and after work we have gone for a drink, right? And everything is forgotten. In other cultures, that's not okay. I can show emotion, I can show my anger, but I can't cross the line, right? So learn what is acceptable in the culture that you're living in. For us, creating conscious and intentional relationships is extremely important. How do you think one can do that, or teams can do that? How do you think we can create conscious and intentional cultures? Thank you, Bertie. By the way, Bertie and I and Milan on the same team. Yes, talking about behavior, talking about what's acceptable, what's the culture we want to create, what behavior will bring that to life, create team charters, which are behavioral contracts, and then keep checking in on them, holding ourselves and each other accountable to those, right? I've always found that across cultures, when you're working with a team, it's very important to work with the leader first, right? Design with the leader, be conscious and intentional about the relationship between you and the leader so that the leader is on board. How do they want you to give them feedback? How do they want to receive feedback? Can you do it in public? Can you do it on the side? How do they want to handle a challenge that may emerge? Right? All of these are conversations that are designed with the leader up front. But I think the most important, gold doesn't work on this. The most important when we are rolling out global initiatives is to trust your local teams. Trust your local teams. Meaning, this is the initiative, this is the issue behind the issue, asking the teams to work out how would it work in your land. Does that mean that it's a little harder? Yes. Does it mean I have to trust you? Oh, imagine that. Yes. Do I trust that you know your land better than I do? Yes. Does it take a little longer? Yes, also. But if you do that, your initiatives are most likely to succeed across cultures at a global context. That's it from me.